at the end of the day, designers sort of become experts in learning fast something new.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Around Design. This time we have someone that I've been wanting to invite for a really, really long time, and finally we're here. Alberto Villareal, who is the Director of Design at Tonal. And I think, Alberto, you'll do a better job than me introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Daniela. I've been also following your work and everything that Gravity Sketch has been doing. I have a huge admiration for you and for your team. And so, yeah, I've been also super interested in having this conversation that we've been planning for a long time. So as you mentioned, my current role is design director at Tonal. My role, basically what I do is I lead both the industrial design team at the company as well as the user experience team. So hence the title of product design director. I've been at Tonal for 1 year, a little over a year. Prior to Tonal, I spent almost 10 years at Google working on the industrial design team for the Pixel phone category. And, that was a pretty big part of my career. Almost half of the time. I've been 20 years in the industry, and it was almost a decade at Google. And then prior to that, I had a consultant experience for another 10 years or so, partly in my own firm. And then prior to that, I was a consultant at Lunar Design, who they recently got acquired by McKinsey. But, Lunar was one of the oldest design firms in the Bay Area. And that's really what I consider the start of my career. Before that, I did some internships in transportation design studios. In fact, I have a degree in transportation design, so I'm very familiar with the tools and processes of that industry as well, which I know your tool is used in the car industry, in the automotive world as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I've been doing for the past 20 years. And I've been really trying to maintain my career as a generalist by design. So I've been wanting to touch many industries and many aspects of design, from architecture to transportation to sports products. Obviously, most of my time has been on consumer electronics. And now I'm also, entering the world of digital design as well as the physical side. So very interested in this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, impressive curriculum, I must say. And,
Thank you.
I was really looking forward to have this conversation because all of this season, we have been talking about communication and collaboration and how our teams, talking to each other and making sure that products come to life. And it's not usually the easiest thing to do, we all use products. We all have things in our hands that, design teams created. And there was a whole process behind those products to get them to the market. And so we very rarely stop to think about how did this actually happen? And in your case, since you've been, working with products that combine the digital side of things and, electronics and so on, but also, just traditional industrial design, and there's a mix. And even now at Tonal, I imagine it's kind of like the next level because you're having to figure out all the human factors as well as all the user experience for the digital side of things. So, it's, right. I think it's going to be kind of a really deep conversation around this. But first, I would like to hear a little bit about how has it been to start working in this? How was it when you started working with digital products, with products that needed to combine physical and digital, and what were the challenges there, and how do you think these things have evolved? How do you think the process has evolved? Because if you started 10 years ago, at Google, or like 11 years ago at Google, it was probably very, very different because it was all very new, and probably you had to start almost from zero to start implementing a lot of the processes and a lot of the ways in which different people, different stakeholders were communicating. So how has it changed?
Yeah, and that's definitely kind of a multi-aspect answer or multi-aspect question. So I can take it in different parts. But, in terms of the process, I think, it's definitely very different what it is like today at Tonal, which is a, much smaller startup environment than working at a company like Google that has, hundreds of thousands of employees. Yeah, but what's interesting is when I started at Google, the hardware, consumer hardware wasn't something that the company necessarily had the right teams and expertise to do. In fact, I started working on the industrial design side team that Mike and Micah created, and the purpose there was to design the Nexus devices, which was this brand that Google had created in partnership with companies that had hardware chops and hardware experience, like Motorola, Samsung, LG, etc. And so, but little by little, we started to bring in the right experts, bringing the right expertise, and obviously starting to establish the right tools and processes and infrastructure, like model shops and materials libraries and things like that, to really start creating that expertise and that hardware knowledge and workforce from the inside. But it took years. It took many years to assemble the right teams, and most importantly, educate the culture and the internal stakeholders about the processes and the timelines and the budgets and all of what requires to make hardware. Because Google was traditionally a software company, so it had a lot of processes, very solid, very robust to create software and to ship software, which is very different than what you need to do to make hardware. So it's interesting comparing my experience of what I'm doing now, dealing with software and hardware products together, with that experience that at Google like 10 or 11 years ago, because I see a lot of similarities, and I believe I can leverage both sides of the advantages of software development and some of the challenges of hardware development on one side, and then on the other side look at the experiences of the products and how you can, by looking at the software aspects and the hardware aspects, create ideally experiences that are more holistically, right? So you can consider both sides at the same time. For example, one of the things that's really interesting about software development is that things move super fast. And that's one of the things that I've been learning, that I'm working on that side as well. Decisions happen much faster. And you can also iterate and improve things even if you have shipped them already to customers. So it's very normal for software companies to bring something to the market and then learn how it performs and then fix things later. And that's why you see multiple software companies releasing updates over the air constantly, because that the system and when you need to build it allows for that fast iteration. Doing that in hardware is not possible, because you have to first spend a lot of dollars in building tools and the whole fabrication system. You also have to acquire material, like physical material, raw material, to be processed in factories. You have to book factory time, production lines, and there's a lot of infrastructure that doesn't allow you to, if something is not working in a product, in a physical product, just release a patch over the air and fix it, right? So obviously it's quite a luxury working on software, because you can iterate and again improve things constantly. But yeah, so I'm kind of learning those things as we go. And so, yeah, I'm kind of mixing some of the process and some of the experience side of things. But what I was trying to say is, yeah, having worked in that environment of, the big software company, starting to develop hardware, it comes in really handy now that, I'm working in more of a startup company doing both things. In a way, the hardware development group, the consumer hardware group at Google, kind of operated as a small startup inside a big company in the initial years, and there were different hardware groups in different software business units scattered around the company that ultimately were assembled under one roof, and then we built a big consumer hardware integrated team. That it's how it works today, but yeah, I think the initial years, the first few years were similar to what a startup company operates.
As the years passed and as you started learning a little bit more, you started shaping your team, you mentioned, with all the different expertise, but I imagine there were so many aspects that were already part of the company or were, part of that hardware team, but that were not necessarily kind of like part of the design team. What I'm talking about is, like maybe the people that were dealing with the electronics or the people that were dealing with manufacturing. And so all of these different people kind of speak different languages. And where I'm trying to get at is how do you manage to deal with communication and to, like sometimes designers, we are very visual beings. We have a very specific process. We do things in a certain way, but then you need to bring some other people that might speak a different language or like do things differently. And so were there like challenges there where did you implemented something that would allow all these different teams to be able to work together in a better way or iterate?
Yeah, for sure. I think definitely, bringing in more people that had hardware experience was one of the key things, because then, it didn't feel like it was just a few crazy people talking about something that nobody understood. So, the more experts came on board from, packaging design, obviously mechanical engineering, supply chain, etc., it started to feel like there were more of us who understood, how to build hardware and what we were talking about. So it was a little bit of a critical mass effect of bringing more people that knew how to build hardware and then using that critical mass to communicate to the rest of the company, or to the people that were the critical stakeholders in how to do it. But again, it's an effort that took a lot of people and also many years. I don't think it was like flipping a switch and then immediately everybody understood it. So it took many I think years and people. One of the things we did, which I remember very well, was trying to create the right environment to look at design and to sort of permeate the value of design across the groups. And that started from even creating the right physical environment. So we had sometimes reviews in just like regular conference rooms, and we realized that was not the right environment to be looking at prototypes and models. We wanted to create something that, practically had good lighting, but also the right surfaces to be looking at models, like a white table, for example. So we created these environments, which were, like these sacred design rooms to evaluate designs, to have presentations, to look at models on the table, that immediately when people were walking in, they were like, oh, this feels different. Like, why can't we have a conference room like this, So it started to feel like the effect of design and the sort of the emotional effect that they would have when they would walk into these rooms. They started to feel it, to immediately understand that there were certain decisions that we made about the materials, the colors, the lighting, the size of the screens that we would use to display stuff there, that were very intentional about how we wanted people to feel and to sort of set the stage for design to be evaluated versus just walking into a random conference room and looking at the models on the table. So we wanted to really create sort of the stage and the right sort of ceremony for design to be appreciated, and that started to work really well. So I think that was one of the keys, not just speaking the right language, but also creating the right environment for design. The furniture that we would pick for those rooms, the way we would display prototypes and models and everything just felt like design was elevated, and that it was like I said, a whole ceremony just walking into that room to have a design presentation or a design review. So those are the simple things that eventually we migrated into a much bigger building that was entirely designed for the hardware design group. But I think those are things that might not feel or might not seem as important for a lot of people, but they have a huge impact on sort of the value that a company or a group of people put in design. So I would encourage anyone who's working on a challenging environment where they feel that design is not, appreciated, or it doesn't have the right value, to definitely try to generate the right environment for it. And it's also the language that you use, but and obviously bringing the right experts, but also sort of how you communicate with small signals that the group of people that are dealing with design are the experts, right? From everything. I used to have a teacher that used to say that we are the experts on aesthetics. So everything we do has to reflect that, from what we wear to obviously which pen we use to everything, it has to reflect that we are the experts on that. So I think that's actually quite true, because ultimately we, that's not our only expertise. We also, should know about manufacturing and user experience and usability and human factors, like you mentioned. But aesthetics is one of our key value adders, so we have to show that we're the experts on that. It took definitely a lot of time to create that. I remember building that first room and building the first model shop at Google, and starting to see the effects of some executives, of some people walking into that presentation room, and definitely appreciating the prototypes and the models differently than just walking into any random conference room.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as you were saying, you were elevating design, you were giving it its place. So I think in a way it could have two, it could be a double-edged sword in a way, because, you were creating this space, and as you mentioned, you were showing people that you guys were the designers that were, making the decisions around the design of the products, which in a way could have made people, could have created walls between people, because, you were saying this is us and you guys are coming into our space. But in reality, I think that because you were elevating it and you were giving it its power, you were almost inviting all of these people to be part of the conversation, right? It was like, we're now in this space and we're allowed to talk about design. And it's everything is possible in this room kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's a very important point that you're touching, because, you definitely don't want to create sort of that wall. But I think the domains of expertise have to be very well defined, and people should understand when they are stepping outside of their realm of expertise, and who's the expert that you're collaborating with. So something that I also mention sometimes is that I think anyone can have an opinion on design, and perhaps because some of the things about design are not necessarily quantifiable or measurable, and there's all sorts of arguments about whether or not they can be measured or not. But I believe there are some things that we can't exactly quantify, just like many other things that are data driven and you can actually count and quantify very well. But I think there are some aspects of design that are not, and one of them is aesthetic. So everybody feels empowered or encouraged to say, I like this and I don't like this. And that's fine. But I think when it comes to actually making decisions, it's very important that people trust designers as the experts in aesthetics. I'm not going to argue with a battery chemistry expert about the chemistry of a battery, because that's not my realm of expertise. I will challenge them to ask them, to have more battery capacity on a smaller battery and things like that. But there's a limit to what I can actually influence in the realm of expertise of that other person. So, and that applies to all the different cross-functional partners that we will interact with, right? So I expect the same from my peers. I want them to know when it's a design decision and it should be driven by designers, because we are the experts in this matter. And that applies also to certain user experience aspects as well. And when it's not a realm of expertise. But again, because everybody makes aesthetic decisions in their life, right? You buy toothbrushes and you buy coffee cups, and everybody does that, and they choose which one to buy or to get. Some people might not care about aesthetics, but ultimately they end up making a choice. And so everybody feels like they can have an opinion on design, and it's totally valid. But again, when it comes to decisions, it has to be very clear that designers are the experts, even if we cannot quantify, again, how much somebody likes something, because that's one of the things you can't really, put a number on. Even if you do, quantitative research and you have some numbers, it's still very hard for a person to say how much you like something, or how much. It's like trying to say how much you love someone. It's not something that you can put a number on. You probably have different feelings about it, but again, it's there isn't really a number to it. So a lot of times it's easy for cross-functional partners to challenge designers and say, well, I don't think this looks right. But one of the things I try to communicate to sometimes people that I'm mentoring, or even to cross-functional partners, is we've been for decades making this type of decisions. And people talk about informed intuition, and sometimes we have to use our informed intuition to sort of as the data that we're using to make the decision, because we are constantly absorbing visual culture in our lives, and we are informing ourselves with a lot of cultural and visual input that at the end of the day creates this educated eye that we're this educated lens that we are filtering everything through, and some of us have been for decades making these type of decisions. And so I really expect trust from our cross-functional partners, just the same way I'm trusting them to make marketing calls, business calls, mechanical engineering calls, and everything that is not in our realm of expertise and our domain. Sometimes you have to bring research to back up some decisions, and sometimes not, depending on the group or the type of decision that you're trying to make. And it's definitely important to make get data and feedback loops sometimes from users, sometimes it's quantitative, sometimes it's qualitative. But it's definitely important to have that research and do your due diligence. Yeah, it's important about how we tell the story to communicate those decisions. And obviously the collaboration aspect, like understanding the language that matters for certain stakeholders. I believe that is not the same that, you don't speak the same way to a mechanical engineering team than how you speak to the branding team, for example. There are different, you might be presenting the same decision or the same conclusion, but there's probably different language that you would use to talk to the different groups.
And is it just the language that you would use, or is it also the tools that you would use, the like methods? I mean, you talked a lot about these physical models and these rooms that were elevating, or were like making sure that the model that you were showing was the way that you wanted everyone to see it. But that's already, I mean, I don't know how far the models were in terms of like development, but that feels already a little bit like far into the process. So were you having, for example, conversations, or like right now at Tonal, probably at Tonal, you're having them a little bit more because it's a startup and like everybody needs to be collaborating way more and it's less kind of like linear. But are you having this, conversations from very early on, like at the sketch stage, or, what's your process like? What do you prefer? Like, do you have your team kind of like really brainstorming and like figuring out how to solve things, like just the design team at the beginning, and then you bring all the other stakeholders into the conversation? Or do you do it like alongside? Because, you can imagine all sorts of different things for like a product to look and like be shaped like and so on. But maybe, as you said, the battery just won't be able to fit in that design that you created. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great question. I think, some of these consumer electronic products, because of the speed at which the market moves, there's no time to be doing a linear process where, there's design and then you entertain design for a few months and then you pass it to the engineers and then they see if the components fit or not, and then they go back. Everything kind of has to be designed and engineered at the same time. So it has to be a very fluid process where you exchange information on a daily basis. But I think there are certain creative exercises that is important to keep protected from influences that might kill ideas too early. I remember the book Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, the founder of Pixar, how he describes that ideas are like babies that are very fragile when they're born, and then you have to protect them and you have to take care of them and foster them and to let them grow and mature. And then you're ready to share those ideas more broadly. But if you let someone kill an idea too early, the idea is fragile and it's gonna not move forward. And so I think it's important for certain creative exercises to remain protected from external influences, making sure that obviously you're bringing in the right information to inform those ideas and that they are solid and they're not, just designing in a vacuum. And then when you try to present them, they have, people can poke holes all over the place. But yeah, I think some exercises are important to be sort of done in an environment that protects them. And again, not necessarily trying to keep design in closed doors and like this secret sort of kitchen, but you just have to be careful about when to share it and to whom you're sharing the early phases of design. One of the things that I remember when I started erring on the side of being too open about the design process is that not everyone understands how to read an early napkin sketch, for example. And so while you might be able to be sharing early sketches or very rough ideas with very low fidelity methods, right? Like a post-it note or a quick sketch on the whiteboard, a lot of people, especially from disciplines that are not very familiar with the creative process, might not understand that idea. Or even a rough rendering, like a keyshot rendering, if you show it too early, people might think it's already like everything has been designed and defined, because you will see things that look like real materials and real, part breakups and things like that, that people will get scared. And so that's very dangerous, because when you show something that you're not 100% sure to someone that doesn't understand it, they might just destroy that idea. And then something that maybe had a lot of potential is not going to go forward. So first, again, I was erring on the side of being super collaborative, super open to sharing, sketchbooks, and even if they're like virtual sketchbook, right? Like just a digital file, not like a physical sketchbook, but a digital file that has a lot of early ideas or very rough ideas. Sharing that with people who you don't know what's their level of design literacy or like design sensitivity can be very dangerous. So what I learned over the years is that it's good to keep those early ideas in a secure place, and when you're ready to share them, then it's the right time to make any ceremony that you want to make to present them. Again, you have to make sure that you have the right input all the time, that you're communicating with your cross-functional partners to get the right input in, so that when you present the idea, it's not going to feel like, again, you're designing in the vacuum and you didn't get the right input. But you have to kind of entertain and manage your cross-functional partners to give them the information that you need to keep them sort of with low anxiety of wanting to see what you're coming up with, but at the same time, you will learn, what to share and at what time, so that your ideas will remain strong and not kill them too early.
How do you find that balance? Like, how do you find that line of being able to talk to someone, giving them enough information so that they give you the information that you need without necessarily unveiling everything?
Yeah, a lot of it comes to the relationships that you build, in your working groups with some people. And, the longer you have been working with specific groups of, engineers or product managers, you will learn to manage those expectations with them, or clients, for people who are in the consultancy world. But yeah, always the first time is a little bit difficult. I think, it's good to try to make as much progress in the early stages of design, but always letting them know that what you're presenting is early on, that some things might look final but they're not, and that there's room for input and for improvement. But yeah, it's always a little bit of a dance, learning how those relationships work, and the longer you can work with a partner, the better for that, because then they develop trust on you as well, and they know that you might not be showing something, but you're actually doing the work and doing all the research and all the bringing in the right input.
And you mentioned designers. I mean, obviously designers being the experts at design, at aesthetics, at just creating products that are going to be interesting, exciting, and useful for humans. Like, that's at the end of the day our goal, right? But then, we start to move into an era of design where products are not what they used to be, as in now they have more and more technology, and you're like in the middle of it all, right? Like, you're right now working on a product or in a series of products, I imagine, that are like fully it's full technology, right? So, and it's full technology alongside with also having to understand about how the body works and like, you know, how you have to move and how the muscles, you know, like a lot of the sports side of things. And so do you think,
Right.
as you've seen, you know, the years pass in that industry, like, where do you think designers should start, like, how do you think designers should start shaping themselves? Because now we can't just be the experts at creating a product that is, you know, like a chair or something like that, that will, you know, be really beautiful for someone, be really useful, be really comfortable, and so on. But you need to understand so many other factors, and you need to be able to adapt and be able to talk to different people so that you get the information that you need. How do you think designers are now having to evolve into this weird breed of something else?
Yeah, I think it's very important to learn fast. I think that's another thing that a friend, you know, another designer from Mexico, Jorge Moreno, used to say, that at the end of the day, designers sort of become experts in learning fast something new. As you switch from a project to another project, or from an industry to another industry, you realize that you have to very quickly learn a lot about that specific thing, in order to obviously be relevant and to have relevant conversations with your cross-functional partners. You know, at the end of the day, building a product, whether it is a software product or a hardware product, it takes a village, and literally it takes hundreds of people to actually get it out the door, and obviously manufacturing and building it. And there are many experts that you have to work alongside with in order to create this product. So, for example, at Tonal, you know, obviously we have performance and sports science experts that will inform us, and you know, what are the right moves, and what are the ergonomics and safety limitations that we can do to make sure that, you know, we don't create something that people will get injured with, and things like that. And so we have to rely on these experts and learn from them a lot. But you know, my point is that we're not becoming those experts ourselves, and yeah, if people want to, of course, you know, they can, you know, learn as much and become expert themselves. But I think at the end, designers, similar to product managers, you sort of live in the middle of the field and have to know how to connect with all these different experts and synthesize all of that input, and then being able to visualize it, or to you know, put a shape to it, or put a form to it. But yeah, I think the key skill is to be able to learn quickly enough so that, again, you have the relevant input, and you have to learn very fast. I think myself, as a, you know, generalist by design, like, I intentionally have not wanted to be specialized in one thing in my career. I've purposefully have this desire to learn a little bit about many things. And at the end of the day, I feel like that's helpful when you have to deal with things that are, you know, very different from what you were doing before, or you have to jump into a new role that you know, didn't think that you were gonna have. So you have to kind of adapt quickly. And it's the same for consultants. Like, sometimes you have a client of an industry that you didn't think that you were gonna work on, and if you're really interested in doing it, you try to learn fast and adapt. And so yeah, that's to me, you know, there's always knowledge that's valuable, even if it's a little bit, that, you know, eventually you will find useful for a project down the line. That's part of why I like to be more of a generalist designer, because, you know, sometimes you learn about certain materials in medical products, and then those materials, you might extrapolate that later, a few years later, into something that's, you know, for the sports industry, or for something completely different. And so I think all that knowledge is at the end of the day useful. But yeah, I think learning fast is something that I think is very critical for designers.
Definitely. And so let's change gears a little bit and talk about more about the technicalities of the process. What is your design process, and obviously your team's design process? As a design leader, you're implementing all of this with your team. Like, how do you get started? Is it like, just take us through the very raw and story on, is it like, as you said, start with paper sketching and just like figuring it out? Do you do a lot of mock-ups? Do you use more digital tools? What do you prefer as a process for your team to follow?
It depends, I think, on the project. When you're creating something that's foundationally different or foundationally new, versus when you're creating something that's sort of a new version of something that you've created already or that exists already. When it's something foundationally new, I think, or fundamentally new, you have to start from understanding what is the human need that's behind what you have to create, right? Depending on the company, sometimes there is a PRD or a product requirements document that somebody in the company will craft, and then they'll hand it to the different teams to basically establish all the limitations and the specifications of what's required for that product in terms of sizes and technical specifications, and how much is gonna cost, how much is gonna sell in the market, and what are the competitors, and all sorts of requirements. And then you have to understand why you're making that. And so I think going back to what is the human need, and trying to understand exactly what is the the problem that you are trying to address and solve, going back to the human, is the most important thing. And then there are all sorts of methods to try to get to that human need. So research is obviously the most important thing right after, because sometimes there will be a lot of research that will be available to you, but sometimes you have to actually do the research and partner with, if you have the in-house experts, partner with user researchers to try to define what is it that you're trying to understand about the human need. And then ideally, once you have that, you will then use that information to go into this divergent thinking, where you will start generating ideas, and with all sorts of methods of brainstorming and ideation, and that's a really fun sort of front end strategic part of the design process, where all ideas are valid, and where you want to invite also other people from other teams to participate with ideas. And sometimes it's also a privilege to participate in that foundational research as a designer, even if you're not the researcher, like conducting the research or facilitating it, but actually being there, observing how people use products, or what where they put them in their house. I remember doing this in the past, and just seeing how people use certain products, where they charge them in the kitchen and next to their beds, etc. It's super interesting. You'll learn a lot by just observing how people use products. And then I think in the industry, people use the double diamond graph, or all sorts of ways to visualize that. A very simple thing that we as designers go through, which is basically, first you don't know about the problem, and then you start learning a lot about it. So you kind of expand and diverge and try to absorb a lot. And then you go into conversion mode, which is like sort of the other end of the diamond, where you, convergent mode, or synthesizing. So first you start absorbing, analyzing, and then you go into trying to synthesize and create ideas. And you get to a point where you will, synthesize and present and share those ideas or share the outcome, get feedback, and then you go back into expansion mode. And so you kind of go into this constant fluctuation between expanding and contracting, and presenting and filtering. I think there are many ways to visualize that, and the design community has created an enormous amount of ways to visualize the double diamond or so. But I think at the end of the day, it's quite simple and quite familiar. So you start from that, go through those phases of expansion and conversion, and then when you finally freeze the final idea, you go into execution mode. And while the design is sort of locked, you basically partner with engineering and development teams to bring that to life. And you will still be involved in basically providing feedback about how that the final design is basically manifested in production, whether it is a digital thing or a physical thing. The physical products have obviously more phases of manufacturing, and there are always manufacturing challenges that you have to address, and multiple phases of starting to build first a few units to prove the design and find whatever issues you have with the early prototypes, until then builds, where you have larger quantities with more mature manufacturing methods or machines, up until the point where you have to actually scale for mass production. So obviously the physical side is longer. It takes more time. It takes more money to go in through those different scale phases. But at the end of the day, once you lock the design, you have to continue being involved in the process of getting something to your final users. And there will be a lot of hiccups along the process. It never, is perfectly linear and perfectly fluid. There's always things that you will find later in the process that you will have to address. And in an ideal world, you try to anticipate all of those issues in the early stages of design. But there's always something that comes up that you have to continue staying involved even in the later stages of production. As I said earlier, the software side of things, the digital side of things, has the luxury of being able to iterate in production and constantly improve the product. On the physical side, it's obviously much more difficult to do that, but you can to some extent change or iterate. But yeah, I think in a nutshell, that is the process. It starts from understanding what does a human need, and really try to stay close to understanding your users and who buys the product, who uses it, how do they use it, and really keeping the human at the center of the design process is super, super important. And then from there, it's all about finding the right methods to generate all the ideas that will address that, and bringing in the right people. I cannot emphasize more that, for brainstorms, you have to bring the people who know more about the problem. So if you're dealing with a logistics issue, go find the logistics expert and bring them in and brainstorm with them, and they will have super valuable knowledge and ideas. Then it's your job as a designer to synthesize all those post-it notes and make sense of them, and start to create like actual visuals or physical forms with that. And then you go through the rounds of creating variations of that, sub-selecting, making more variations, sub-selecting, and that sort of continuous process of iteration and variation up until when you lock the design. And along the way, you have to bring input from anyone who will be a critical decision maker and stakeholder.
And the tools that you use for communicating with all these different stakeholders that you need to be bringing for these brainstorms and conversations and so on, you just figure it out, right? Like you can use as you said, post-it notes. You can use models. It can be a cardboard model. It can be a render, like whatever you need to be doing to actually be able to bring this idea out, right?
Yeah, that's super important to it's important for designers to have this like buffet of methods and levels of fidelity and know, and this is something that I guess you learn over the years or through the years is, what method is the right one at what stage in the process, so that you're spending the right amount of energy and fidelity to understand something, to prove a concept quickly, so that ultimately you start with a lot of ideas, you start generating quantity, but want to eliminate as many as possible, so that you start narrowing down. And so you don't need to spend huge amount of fidelity in the early stages if it's not the right time, because you're not going to be spending a lot of time in the details in the beginning. I think that the early stages is more about the macro ideas, the gestures, and then you start refining details and adding more fidelity and more details later down the process. But yeah, there's a myriad of methods. There's, like you mentioned, quick models, quick cardboard, post-it notes, simple sketches, simple napkin sketches, all the way to like super high fidelity prototypes, appearance models, and obviously renderings along the way.
And so we're reaching the end of the episode, and we always like to ask 2 questions. So the first question is, who would you nominate to be another guest at Around Design, at this podcast? And the second one is, for the next person that is going to be invited, it doesn't have to be the person that you're like talking about, but for someone else that is coming in and is going to be talking about communication in the design process, what question would you ask them?
I'll answer the second question first, which is, I would love to know what they think about the future of our tools. I've been thinking a lot about the current debate that there is in the media about the use of artificial intelligence in the design process, and not for only the design process, but for a lot of things like text generation and so on. So I'd love to talk about and hear thoughts about what that means. I have my own personal opinion about it, but I think it's a very rich topic to discuss. And who I would invite, I would probably invite Hector Erraue to the conversation. I think he's a designer that I admire a lot, that has created an amazing body of work over decades. Somebody I had the opportunity to collaborate in one project a few years ago, and that is also a good friend. And yeah, I think he has a lot of stuff to say about process, materials, and also challenging the process. I think that's something that I also admire in designers, and I try to do myself, like not always follow a formula, but to actually try to change it and challenge it sometimes as well.
Nice. Well, another fellow Mexican for sure. So Hector, we'll be reaching out.
That's cool.
Nice. All right. Well, Alberto, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for the invitation. And we're right about before my battery in this laptop dies. So before I have to go reach out for the power adapter. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and yeah, keep me posted.